Welcome back to the College Football Cauldron. I'm Bubba Walkenbeef, and thank you so much for tuning in to our 10th episode. Sorry about the technical difficulties if you were watching earlier. That's what happens when you produce and host it by yourself. I'm not great with tech either. A lot of exciting things to talk about, but I first want to start off and just send my condolences up to Charlottesville. A horrible situation up there. I mean, that's the last thing that you want as a brother, as a son, as a parent. You don't want to hear anything ever like that, especially to great young student athletes. I have a friend that I played youth football with who's on the Virginia team currently, and I couldn't imagine what it's like for him and his family and someone in his position room to get killed like that. It's just the absolute worst situation that anyone could go through. So I'm sending all my prayers and condolences up to Charlottesville, as I'm sure a lot of people are. So a few things we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about LSU. We're going to talk about Alabama, or not Alabama. We're going to talk about Georgia. We're going to talk about USC, just talk about their playoff contention, talk about the road that they need to get to the playoffs. Another thing we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about how our college football team is built nowadays, and then we're going to go through our picks. We're going to look back at our season totals, and then we're also going to go to our top matchups of the weekend. So let's get right into that. So first, we're going to start off with just looking at this. So you may look at this and say, what is this list? This list isn't rankings. This list doesn't have anything to do with the playoffs. What is this list? Well, I can tell you that this list is the 247 transfer portal rankings. So this is from 2022, so this is from this past offseason. And why am I showing this list? What importance does this list have? Well, all three of these teams were in bad situations last year, besides Ole Miss. Ole Miss went 10-2, had a great season, but Ole Miss lost a lot over the offseason. USC went 4-8, LSU went 6-7. At the end of LSU's season, they had 39 scholarship players. So why is this list important? Well, I just want to show this list and talk about how important the roster turnover is nowadays in college football and how teams are built. Because you see these teams, USC had 20 kids added in the transfer portal. Ole Miss had 17 kids added in the transfer portal. LSU had 16 kids added in the transfer portal. You can build a roster, you can flip nearly 50% of your scholarship players in one offseason. So if you add 20 transfer portal players and then you add 25 commitments, that's 45 out of 80 scholarship spots that you can flip in one offseason. And like I said, USC was in a bad situation, but USC brings in Caleb Williams. They bring in Mario Williams. They bring in Jordan Addison. They bring in Travis Dye. All those guys just completely revitalize the team. Now USC may be contending for a playoff seat. Another team, Ole Miss lost its top 4 leading rushers from last year. So you bring in Jackson Dart, you bring in Zach Evans. Quinshon Judkins is a freshman, but you still bring in a lot of pieces via the transfer portal to help shore up your team. LSU is another team, and another thing that all three of these teams have in common, all of them are starting transfer quarterbacks right now. Jaden Daniels transferred in from Arizona State. Jackson Dart transferred from USC to Ole Miss, and Caleb Williams transferred from Oklahoma to USC. So all three of these teams are starting transfer quarterbacks. All of them have pieces from the transfer portal. LSU had 39 scholarship players, as I mentioned earlier, at the bowl game last year against Kansas State in Houston. Brian Kelly comes in, flips the roster around, gets guys that are willing to buy into his program, and now they're SEC West champions. So they're going to go to Atlanta and play Georgia here. But I just want to put this up to show I think it's going to be tough for teams going forward, and not only teams but for coaches to get as much time as they have in the past, because you have the success of guys like Lincoln Riley. You have the success of guys like Brian Kelly in year one. Both of those guys are most likely going to their conference champion games. That means I know the Pac-12 doesn't have divisions, but USC would have won the South if they beat UCLA this weekend. LSU won the West already, and there's still 2 weeks to play. I don't think anyone ever saw that coming. So just showing, I think teams like Florida, teams like Miami, teams like Oklahoma, I think a lot of these teams are going to have a lot of roster turnover because they saw a lot of the administration, a lot of the presidents, a lot of the athletic directors saw that these teams had success in year one. Why can you not have success in year one? And I think that's just going to result in more turnover, more transfers than we've ever seen before. I know the portal's been slowly growing. I think we see a bit of an exponential jump with the amount of kids in the portal this offseason. So I just want to start the show talking about that and just kind of bring into question how we build a college football team today. Next thing we're going to talk about, we're going to go to our playoff contenders. We have 3 this week, LSU, Georgia, and USC. So we're going to start off with the Tigers this week. So LSU, let's just go through the schedule. So they have 2 games left, UAB at home, and then they go to Kyle Field. I have Texas A&M highlighted as a key game, despite A&M only winning 3 games this entire season and only winning 1 conference game this entire season. I still think Kyle Field's a tough place to play. I think Connor Wegman's going to get better as he gets more snaps. I know he had a rough game against Auburn last week, but I expect Connor Wegman to get better. Hopefully guys like Moose Muhammad, Devin Achane, and Evan Stewart play for A&M in that game for the sake of A&M fans more than anyone else. But what does LSU have to do to get the playoffs? LSU is a two-loss team. A two-loss team has never made the playoffs. What does LSU have to do to get there? LSU is going to need to win out. That's first easy, pretty easy. If you lose a game, you're not making it. So the first thing you need to do if you're LSU, you need to win out. And I think you need USC or TCU to lose a game. Preferably, now you definitely need TCU to lose a game. I think USC losing a game as well really helps you. You're sitting in that 6th spot right now. You know Michigan or Ohio State most likely won't make it. They'll knock each other out because they play each other. If TCU can slip up and then Ohio State slips up or Michigan slips up, one of them's bound to. I think LSU could slide into that 4 slot. But that's going to be tough because they're going to have to beat Georgia. So I don't see this happening, but it's what, even if they don't make the college football playoff, it's still been a fantastic season for Brian Kelly and Baton Rouge. No one came into the season with the expectations of winning the West, besides maybe LSU fans. But I know no one really thought LSU was going to win the West this year. So great job by Brian Kelly and LSU there, even if they don't make the playoff. Next team we're going to talk about is Georgia. Georgia's key games. They only have one left, and that's this week against Kentucky. And it may not even be a key game because they are 22.5-point favorites. We're going to talk about that one a little bit later. Georgia Tech doesn't count as a key game. I know it's a rivalry, but Georgia Tech just lost to Miami, and Miami covered against an FBS team for the first time. So, fortunately, if Miami covered against you, you don't count as a key game anymore. So, what does Georgia need to do to make the playoff? Well, they have a lot of flexibility at this point of the season. Georgia has the ability to lose a game and still make the playoff, which I don't know too many other teams can do. So Georgia could lose one of these next 2 games. I don't think they will, but if they do, they go win. They've already clinched the East, so they can go ahead and beat LSU in the SEC championship game and still make the playoff that way. The more likely scenario for Georgia to lose a game would be Georgia wins the next 2 and then loses in the SEC championship game, much like they did last year to Alabama, and they still make the playoff. They'll still make the playoff this year as well. I think the Dogs are kind of more in one of those positions where it's going to be harder to miss it than harder to make it. But you never know. College football's given us some crazy things this year already. So, next up, let's talk about USC. Big game this weekend. Not only big game this weekend, but big game next weekend. If USC drops this game, there's a shot that they don't even go to the Pac-12 championship game. So this game, the Rose Bowl, big atmosphere. A lot of people are going to be there. Apparently, it's sold out. I think they're keeping the tarps up, but it's still sold out. So, big game this weekend, cross-town rivalry for UCLA and USC. We'll talk about that one a little bit later. But yeah, those are the 2 games. UCLA this week, Notre Dame next week. Win those 2 and you're in the Pac-12 championship. Win this week actually and you're in the Pac-12 championship. It's a pretty easy formula for USC. Now, what does USC need to do to make the playoff though? USC needs to win out. That's number 1. They already have 1 loss. It was a tough game. They lost by 1 on the road in Salt Lake City, but you already have 1 loss. You want LSU to lose in the SEC championship game, and you want TCU to lose a game, because I think the committee would love to put a 1-loss USC team above a 1-loss TCU team, whether TCU wins the conference championship or they're runners-up because they lost the conference championship game. I think a 1-loss USC team gets in over TCU. So those are the 3 teams we're talking about. This segment just keeps getting shorter and shorter because we have less games to talk about. So we may not even do this next week because I think the playoff picture besides Ohio State, Michigan may get even more clear next week. So this may be the last time we do this year. So until next year on the playoff contender segment. So let's move on. So we're going to look at our season win total. So this is not from this week. This is from the first show. We did this before the season. We also posted an article about it on the website if you want to go read that. So we're going to go through each team. Arkansas has had a rough year. KJ Jefferson, I don't think, has been 100%, which is why I think we've seen a big drop in his efficiency. They're running the football well, not as well as they did last year, because Ole Miss is running the football better than them this year, while Arkansas led the SEC in rushing in 2021. But they're not running the football quite as well as they did last year. Now, KJ Jefferson's decline, I guess you could call it, is that Traylon Burks leaving? Is that other personnel around him? Is that injury? I think it's hard to tell. I tend to lean injury because he didn't even play this past week while playing the Liberty game. He missed the Mississippi State game as well, missed the end of the Alabama game. I think he's just been really dinged up. It's really hurt this Razorbacks offense. But they do have an opportunity to go 7-5 if they win the next 2 games. They have a tough home game against Ole Miss this week and then finish their season at Missouri on the 26th. So that's our 1 loss. We're in a pretty good spot, but Arkansas being plus 125, we'll have loved to hit that. It's not going to happen, though. So another one, Virginia under 7.5. That was minus 190, so we're more likely than not to hit that. But I just thought there was too much turnover on Virginia in the coaching office, on the offensive line. Some key positions. You have Blunt on defense get drafted by the Seahawks. Noah Taylor transferred to North Carolina. I thought he's one of their better defensive players from 2021. Virginia is always going to be an uphill battle to get 7.5 wins. I didn't see it happening, and it doesn't look like they're going to get there either. So that's all. Actually, I know they're not going to get there. There's not enough games left. So Virginia under 7.5 hit. So we're 1-1. Utah's the one team that's still outstanding. We don't know what's going to happen with the Utes. The Utes have 2 games left. They play at Autzen Stadium this week against the Oregon Ducks. And then next week they play against the Buffs. I don't see them losing Colorado in any way, shape, or form. But they can more than likely, or not maybe more than not likely, but there's a good shot they lose against Oregon. They're 3-point underdogs this weekend. But I came on not earlier today, but the first episode we did, I said I think it would be a disappointing season if Utah won 9 games. I think it'd be a disappointing season, and you could still push the bet. So I think we're in that situation. Utah's either going to go over or they're going to push, which means we're either going to go 3-1-1 or we're going to go 4-1 actually, which would be awesome. Auburn under's already hit. There's a lot of turnover in Auburn right now. They're looking for a new coach. They're really struggling out there on the plains. They're not going to get there. They're 4-6 right now, so that one's already hit. And then Illinois was by far the easiest out of all of these bets. Illinois started the season 5-1. Illinois started the season 7-1 actually. So it was pretty easy to see if Brett Bielema got a better offensive coordinator in there, which he did with Barry Loomy, and then got an efficient quarterback, maybe not a superstar quarterback, but an efficient quarterback like he did in Tommy DeVito. I think the Illini were always going to be a much better team than people give them credit for. So there we are. We're going to be 4-1 or 3-1-1 unless Utah drops a game into Colorado, which they're not going to. So pretty good on season win totals. Don't have an opportunity to kind of continue our success until next year, but I'm fine with that going 3-1-1 or 4-1 on these season win totals. So let's head into our bets last week. So we didn't have a show last week. We had a scheduling conflict, but I posted these on Twitter. So these were the bets from last week. We started out, these were not the bets from last week. These were bets from a few weeks ago, actually. Let me take those off. So the bets from last week, I remember them off the top of my head, actually. So the bets from last week were Virginia at home against Pitt. I like the under in that game, and this was more of a weather play than anything else. I thought the tropical storm that was moving through would go through Charlottesville this time. It didn't happen. I also had the first score of the game being 7 minutes or later into the game, which was a plus 100 bet. Pitt scored on the first play of the game. So those two were out the window. That's 2 quick losses. I also had Tulane minus 1.5 against UCF. UCF went outright. The Knights played really good the entire game. So we started the day 3-0. It was looking bad, and we only had 3 more plays left. The best we could do is 500, but we finished strong. We had Ole Miss against the spread at home. We had them at 11.5, I believe. They lost by 6, covered easily, and the Rebels honestly looked a lot better than I thought they did. So they played Bama really well last week. They covered that one. I have Florida State minus 7 on the road against Syracuse. They blow them out. Syracuse is really struggling. That one was no doubter. And the one that I was a little worried about was North Carolina, Wake Forest. Both teams were scoring at will for a while. A big North Carolina turnover late gave them a big opportunity to take the lead, kick a field goal, go ahead. And the North Carolina defense, for as bad as they've been the entire year, really clutched up at the end of the game. So I had Carolina money line, actually, which was a plus 150 bet last week. So I'm sorry I don't have the graphic up, but those were all the bets from last week. Went 3-3, but we were in the plus on the money because Carolina was plus 150 and Ole Miss was minus 105. So that was pretty close to even odds as well. So now let's take a look at this week's bets now. First game is UConn at Army. Army has a really surprisingly bad run defense for being a service academy. Typically, service academies are worse against the pass than they are against the run. Army isn't great against the run. They're ranked in the hundreds in run defense, and UConn is 35th in the entire country in rush offense. I like UConn to run the ball here, keep the game close at minimum. I think 10's a big number for Army to cover. They've dropped their last 2 games. UConn had a big win over Liberty, so give me Jim Morris squad here on the road, plus 10. That's going to be a minus 110 bet. TCU, all the Frogs do is cover. I doubted them last week. I know we didn't have a show last week, so I wasn't able to talk about the game. I thought Texas would win in a close one. TCU won in a very low-scoring game, which I don't think too many people saw coming. But I like the Frogs here. I'm just going to ride with the Frogs. The Frogs, I believe, only dropped 1 game against the spread the entire season. So give me the Frogs here. I'm just rolling with the hot hand at this point. I think Vegas still has them undervalued. Iowa at Minnesota. The over's 32. There's not a lot of points. If you watch either of these teams, you know why the number's set that low. But the Iowa offense has been getting better. The last 3 games, they've averaged 27 points, and they've scored more than 24 points in all 3 of those games. So I think the Iowa offense is maybe not getting rolling is a strong term, but they're moving in the right direction. So give me Iowa, Minnesota over of 32 here. That's a minus 115. I missed the minus sign I saw, but that's a minus 115 bet. Syracuse at Wake Forest. Give me Wake Forest minus 10 at home, actually. Both these teams are really reeling. Wake Forest has dropped, I believe, 2 or 3 consecutive games. Syracuse has dropped 4 consecutive games now after starting the season 6-0. I do think Wake Forest is the better team, though. Syracuse is struggling to find its footing. I think Wake Forest kind of got a little rejuvenated last week after that game against Carolina. I saw a lot of fight from that team, and you have an experienced quarterback with Sam Hartman. A.T. Perry is still a really good receiver. Give me the Demon Deacons minus 10 here against the fledgling Orange. And we have a parlay. It's only the second parlay we've done all year. And there's a reason why, because the first parlay ended horribly. We had a big favorite money line parlay. 2 of the 5 or 6 teams lost. So we stay away from parlays, but I like this one. I put a little bit of extra cash on this one. We got Georgia and Tennessee both to cover. I'm going to talk more about the Georgia game because we're talking about Tennessee a little bit later. But Georgia, it's not really anything it's not much about the Bulldogs that I'm betting on. I just know Georgia's a championship caliber team. They've been really hot since Missouri as well. They came out, they've killed Auburn. They looked really good against Florida after Florida punched back a little bit. Looked great against Tennessee. Looked great last week as well. I like the Bulldogs here. And we all know Kentucky's issues. Kentucky hasn't been able to run the football the entire season. Now the pass offense is struggling as well. Georgia won't let Kentucky run the football on them. I don't trust Will Levis enough to just carry them to cover that number. I believe it's at 22.5 right now. May have moved to more, but I got it at 22.5. I don't think Kentucky gets any movement. I think the Dogs, though the Kentucky defense is solid, I think Georgia just does whatever they want with them because that's what Georgia's done almost the entire season, besides Missouri on offense. So give me Georgia here. I like Tennessee to cover, but I'm going to talk about Tennessee a little bit later. So we'll hold off on that one for a little bit. So actually, we're talking about Tennessee right now. So we're going to do our top 3 matchups of the weekend. Let's start off with Tennessee at South Carolina. So a few things to look for in this game. Everyone knows the Tennessee rush defense is much better than the Tennessee pass defense. Tennessee pass defense is 124th in the country in yards allowed. South Carolina isn't horrible passing according to the statistics. Obviously watching the games is a different thing, but according to the statistics, South Carolina is 69th in passing offense, and they're 77th in pass yards per completion. So below average to average passing offense. Can the South Carolina passing attack take advantage of the weak Tennessee secondary? Tennessee, everyone knows going into Tennessee with how you attack them. You attack them by throwing the ball around. Kentucky wasn't able to do it. Georgia was able to do it, and Georgia was also able to run the ball pretty effectively. So can South Carolina take advantage of the weak Tennessee secondary? Tennessee does play pretty aggressive, though, on the back end, so there's also potential for turnovers there. Another thing is, how much can South Carolina slow down this Tennessee offense? South Carolina is 78th in total defense, while Tennessee is number 1 in total and scoring offense. Tennessee is a juggernaut on the offensive side of the football. South Carolina is just average on defense and really on both sides of the ball. I think it's going to be really tough for the Gamecocks this week. I don't think this offense is going to get much push. South Carolina is one of the, I don't have it listed here, but they are one of the worst rushing offenses in all of the country. Very, very mediocre passing game. There's a lot of pressure put on Spencer Rattler in the passing game to move the ball, but they haven't been very efficient either. The completion percentage is relatively low to the national average. I think it's going to be a tough game, but South Carolina, you know what you have to do. You have to come out, you have to throw the ball around. And I don't know what you do on the defensive side of the football because you don't have the athletes Georgia does. Now, South Carolina's pass defense is solid, but teams run at will against South Carolina, and Tennessee is a top 25 running offense as well. So it's going to be tough for the Gamecocks, but I'm looking forward to watching it, which is why it's one of the top 3 matchups of the weekend. I'm looking forward to seeing if they can come out and take advantage of the atmosphere. Next game, we're going to go UCLA against USC. The Bruins are playing at home in the crosstime rivalry. The game's sold out. Big game for West Coast football this weekend. So there's a few things. Both offenses are in the top 11. So you'd think we'd see a massive offensive output this week. I think we get one. They overset at 77. Let's see how that one turns out. Can UCLA avoid turning the ball over? Not because they're a turnover-prone team, but because USC is a turnover-hungry team. USC leads the country in turnovers as far as turnovers taken away and turnover margin. USC is plus 17 in turnover margin right now. The Trojans do a fantastic job of getting the football back to the explosive offense. So can Dorian Thompson-Robinson, Zach Charbonnet, and the rest of the UCLA offense keep the ball out of the hands of USC? Another thing is Zach Charbonnet, just mentioned him. He leads the country in yards per carry at 7.53 yards per carry. USC has a pretty average rush defense. They rank in the high 50s, low 60s in most rushing statistics. Can they slow down Zach Charbonnet? Because not a lot of teams have been able to this year. And another thing is UCLA is 102nd in pass yards allowed per game. USC is explosive. I mean, we know all the weapons they have. They have Jordan Addison, Mario Williams, a lot of other solid receivers. Taj Washington's on the team as well. A lot of great weapons for USC. It's 102nd in pass defense. I don't think is a great recipe to beat them, but I also think something that UCLA can do is ground and pound the football and just keep USC's offense off the field. USC's defense isn't great, but they're a very opportunistic bunch. They'll get USC's offense the football back. So there's a few things I'm looking for in that game. And then last but not least, we are looking at Utah versus the Oregon Ducks. Utah, after beating Oregon twice last year, once at home in Salt Lake City, another time in Las Vegas in the Pac-12 championship game. Utah travels to Eugene. The Ducks are going to want their revenge. They got embarrassed not once, but twice last year. Dan Lanning and his staff don't want to have a repeat of last year. So just a few things to talk about. Oregon is 91st in total defense, which is really surprising because they're a good run defensive unit. Oregon is 17th in total rush defense right now, but 91st in total defense. That's a little bit of an odd mixture because Utah is 22nd in total defense, and then they're 21st in total offense. So you see the balance that this Utah squad has. How does Oregon stop the Utah rushing attack? Oregon has a good run defense. Utah has a good running offense. Utah's in the top 20s. I believe they're around 25 in rushing offense. I think Oregon has a big advantage in this game against their offense. Oregon is second in the country in total offense. Utah has a good defense. Like I said, they're 21st in the country when it comes to total defense. I think Oregon gets over the hump this year. I'm not necessarily saying there's a Utah hump they have to climb, but they just get over the embarrassment that they had last year in both games. So that should be exciting to match. Our top three matches of the weekend are Tennessee at South Carolina, UCLA at home against USC, and then Utah on the road against Oregon. I want to thank everyone for coming in tonight and watching. There's some technical difficulties, really threw off the timing of everything.